It did.
My eyebrow waggling. Yes.
I'm like, is there supposed to be sound?
Nope.
Okay.
I was just testing. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Just sit here like.
For 3 minutes. All right, I'm gonna delete that one.
All right, so that's live now. Give me a second, and I'm gonna grab the streaming link.
If it's live, I should just be able, let me just check. I should be able to grab it off of here. Yep, there we are.
All right, I sent you the link anyway.
I should just be able, let me just check. I should be able to grab. I'm gonna turn the that's gonna be weird. Let me just grab this. Let me mute this.
So this is our test for the board meeting that's going to be on April 20th.
Right. Are we expecting a big crowd?
Of
Committee?
Yeah, the committee. I'm expecting the committee. Yes.
Okay.
The public, not so much.
Yeah.
We'll do the same thing like we did when we met. You'll share your screen and run through some of those pictures. I mean,
Right.
I know it's well, anyway, yeah, that's the sketches we'll share out. They'll
Right.
be up on YouTube. So.
I'll give a little preamble and then we'll walk through the sketches and leave at least 15 minutes at the end for discussion.
Very good.
So it's live on our website. I don't think, like, for the actual board meeting, we'll be able to monitor the comments because of that delay.
Yes.
But people could comment on the YouTube, or yeah, on the YouTube comment section.
Okay.
Morning, Catherine.
Hey, Catherine. Hi.
Paul and Lisa, how are you doing in this crazy time?
Okay,
We're still married.
good thing we have 2 floors.
Yeah.
1 floor per person, good ratio.
Yeah. The kids have to find a safe spot somewhere in between.
Right. Per adult person.
That's right. Have you been doing your classes remotely?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, I have. I have my last class meeting next Wednesday. Other than that, everything else will be asynchronous teaching.
Okay.
Which is much easier on them as well.
I see. My father teaches mathematics out in the University of Nebraska system, and I guess that's not very easy when you don't have them right in front of you.
Right.
Hard enough when they are in front of you.
Yes. Morning, Michelle.
Michelle joined us.
Hi guys, just wondering if you can hear me.
We can.
Okay, good.
Seems like Now, see, I'm not getting those. Can someone forward the invitation link to Mark? Because I've sent it to him a couple.
Sure, I'll do that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Morning,
Hi,
Robert.
Robert.
I can't get my lighting correct.
You're
My
working.
camera is old.
They can fix it in makeup.
Do you cut hair?
all.
Paul, do you cut hair? Because that's what's happening.
I don't know. I'm going to get desperate soon, though.
I just forwarded that link to Mark.
Okay, thank you.
As I've confessed on Facebook, I'm a close talker in these Zoom meetings because I'm still not used to the fact that you can hear me without my raising my voice. So
Gotcha.
apologies in advance. It's just instinct.
Right.
Morning, all.
Good morning, Chris.
Yeah, we're all learning new social protocols, even for
Right.
Yeah, I was debating if drinking your coffee slowly during the meeting was acceptable, but the alternative was just to die.
That's really rude. Right.
I think you can't eat a plate of ham and eggs, but that coffee is acceptable.
Kevin?
Good morning, Kevin.
Morning.
Morning.
And here's Mark.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
Now, on my end, it's just showing whomever is speaking. Will it eventually go to the boxes where it shows everyone in our group?
That should be a choice that you have. If you look up in the top right, right now, that's called speaker view, and you might have, I don't know what the alternative view is. Might be like 9 little squares.
Yeah, gallery view. Speaker view or gallery view. And then if within gallery view, Michelle, you can then choose if you want to see everyone or just a subset.
No, I get to pick and choose which people I see.
I'm not sure you can choose which individuals. That's interesting. I haven't tried that.
You should have that option for face-to-face meetings, too.
There you go.
We're still Mark.
The names come
Mark isn't here.
I can see Mark.
Mark's at work.
I can see Mark's video.
Yeah, well, my computer's at work, but I'm at home.
Ah,
How cool is that? We can look at your pen certificates.
Exactly. Yeah.
cameras.
Look at all those awards. That's
Now it's just pointed in the wrong way. I'm VPNing from home, so.
okay.
Gotcha.
So
I
are
have
we
you on
all
photo.
here? Okay. So shall I call us to order? Welcome, everybody. A couple of points of business to begin, and then I thought I'd turn things over to Paul and Lisa to walk us through the document that you sent us, which we've all had, I think we've all had a chance to look at. The first thing I just want to mention is, as most of you know, my term as trustee is ending at the end of this season. June, I think, would be my last meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
Mhm. And so Harmeet has graciously agreed to step into the chair role for the Long Range Plan Committee at the end of this month. So I think that would officially happen at our Monday, April 20th board meeting, that we could officially make that change. So thank you, Harmeet. And I just wanted to make everybody aware that that would be happening. I'll still be on this committee, but Harmeet will be chairing it. Second, just looking ahead at the long range plan timeline. So after today's meeting, the next thing I have on our timeline, Paul and Lisa, is Paul a half-hour update at the next board meeting, which is
Right.
Monday, April 20th.
Mhm.
And then the next board meeting update would be 2 months later, June 8th, also Monday.
I have both of those. Presumably they'll be remote until notified otherwise.
Right. And in between that, we just need to schedule the May committee meeting, which I think we can do at the end of this meeting. But we'll need to agree on a date to meet in May, which on the timeline you gave me has our agenda item reviewing solutions.
Right.
So that is all I have for logistics. And so I'll turn things over to you, Paul, and to you, Lisa.
Okay. Well, thank you. We will endeavor to try and go through these. You've had a chance to review them, so they shouldn't be completely new to you, but to explain some of our thinking behind these items. In a way, we've jumped ahead a little bit. These are not solutions yet. These are not the review solutions, but they're sketches that put ideas on paper. Architects like to have things on paper for discussion purposes. Otherwise, we could spend the next few months talking about what ifs. What if we did this or that? But so a little bit of a prologue. I want to make sure that everybody understands and agrees a few things. First of all, we're providing 3 or 4 different solutions that have varying levels of intervention here, these sketches, but that's not all of them. We still need, when it's safer to travel, to go visit the Borthwick House and talk about the potential use of that building as all cards on the table. Everything can be looked at and all things have value at the beginning. So we're going to examine that again when it's safe to go in terms of protocols for travel and so forth. So it's coming up. I assume we can visit that when it's just us and maybe Kevin can let us in or something to that effect. But at the moment, we're still staying home for as much as we can, but we'll set that up. The second thing that I wanted to say, and I'm already guilty of it, is not to call these sketches solutions. I explained this when a few of us talked the other day. None of these is going to be the final scheme. We know that. We're putting them on paper for the purposes of discussion to talk about how effective any of them might be at addressing the primary considerations and priorities that came out of the public meetings. We're lucky in terms of timing that we got the charrettes and the We Heard You meetings and so forth completed prior to the crisis that has shut down so many other things. We have a few libraries that spent money advertising for those very things and then had to cancel them. So we're lucky we had all this and could start looking at some things. So with your permission, we're going to walk through these. We may go a little quickly to make sure that we leave time at the end, but if you would bear with us, then we will come back to any of the screens and then talk about what they mean in more detail if you wish. Does everybody have a sketch of the site up on their screen now?
I do. Michelle.
I do.
Yay, technology.
Mark, I do.
Okay, excellent. The first screen is really just a sketch exercise, part of what we call constraints and opportunities. In other words, it looks at the site and establishes what are the things that we're working around. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. So if we know we're not tearing down the existing building, at least in large part, maybe small pieces, we know that's an existing. We know that the parking has been established, and although It requires some fixing at the knoll and some other areas. That's already a set piece, if you will. There are also underground utilities and so forth, as well as things like property lines and meets and bounds. So having taken all those things into consideration, what we're doing is looking at, in this case, 5 or 6 areas of potential addition. Again, to be absolutely clear, we're not advocating that we build out to the footprint of every one of these 1 through 5A pieces. We're just showing where the potential is to construct additional square footage for the building without infringing in a major way upon the existing infrastructure and pieces that are there. So you can see Delaware Ave is at the bottom, Borthwick is on the right. Item number 4 is, I'm sorry? Item number 4 is actually the location of the Borthwick house. And I will say it struck me as we were looking at this, that's actually narrower than I was picturing in my mind. My gut reaction was that gave us a little more flexibility than it actually does. The reason for that is that on the north side, if I move my cursor, do you see this moving? There are utility lines that run through here. So water and sanitary sewer and so forth. And if at all possible, we'd like to avoid having to interrupt those. But in my mind, I was thinking we could go out to the sidewalk, but you can see we're cutting a good 10 to 15 feet off to avoid those things. So in general, this is just an overlook at the property, what the opportunities are, and where we can feasibly expand without interrupting too many other things. The other thing I'd mention is the lawn area up here, which has been graded and also appears to have stormwater management, which would also be difficult to relocate, given that we're essentially filling the entire site with building, parking, and so forth. It's one of the few green spaces left in order to allow for infiltration. So we'll talk about some of the strategies related to specific areas of addition when we look at the sketches as we go, but are there any other questions on sheet A? Pretty self-explanatory. Okay, great. Anything you would like to add, Lisa?
Nope, I think you got it all.
Okay. Sheet B is really because parts of sheet A hadn't been updated with the last plaza, but it shows us a little more detail and in fact the potential for an idea of an item on the Borthwick property. Is somebody talking or no? It keeps sounding like somebody's trying to jump in, and I don't want to overtalk anybody. So, okay. One of the things you see here, again, north is to the top of the page, is the potential on the Borthwick property that a structure might be constructed there that is separate, an annex building to the existing library. It's been our experience that typically does not work well for things like staff or administrative staff because of the remoteness that's created both physically and philosophically. There can be an us versus them thing that comes out of that. We've seen it at a few of our libraries where they had that existing. And in fact, one of the priorities becomes getting those people more involved in the building. But the potential is there to create another building that has a separate function that might be things like the maintenance shops, the various pieces related to ongoing site upkeep. And we could be doing outreach things there as well. It's even possible that it could be a separate building with a meeting room and restrooms that could be open even when the library is closed, in the same way that existing meeting rooms can be open after hours. But it's just an idea. It's also possible that instead of a new structure, that's actually the Borthwick house, if we found that it was suitable for certain functions or reusable in some way. The other things to talk about, particularly in the northwest corner up here, are the potential for an addition in this location to do a few things. One, and primarily, is to cut down on the distance of travel from the parking lot through the plaza all the way down to the entry. Right now, that's one of the key complaints we've heard from a lot of the public is how far it is from here, even though the plaza is lovely, to get to the front doors. Now, the distance obviously is still the same from here to here, but if this were infilled with an addition, it gives us the chance to make that interior space, which gives us square footage, but also protects that accessible pathway, meaning that although the same travel distance, a lot of it's indoors, and the perception is that it's a shorter distance because you've gotten indoors quickly, but we've also taken away a lot of the liability because of the ice and exposure to elements. The other key feature of something that happens here, and we'll talk about different ideas of what that might be, is the potential to connect to the lawn area. That is, that an addition here has the opportunity, if any of you have visited, for example, the Seiji shed at Tanglewood with big barn doors that open into the lawn. So you can imagine if there was a meeting room here, you could have a concert and it could be open in the evening, you know, on a summer evening to a concert in the lawn area, or children's programs that go directly to the outside and an open space. So trying to make more of a connection to the site, primarily because the existing building is so inwardly focused, these are opportunities to try and express a connection to the outdoor area. So we know there are other parking things, the knoll we talked about, where the book drop gets located. There are lots of things to work out, but we just wanted to talk about those general ideas here.
Paul,
wanna
just
add
to
anything
get
to
a
that?
sense of scale,
Moving the bus stop to see
Oh, moving the bus stop was another one. We're,
over back there, just
Yeah.
moved over.
if the bus stop moves over a little bit, it cleans up a drop off area and so forth. But again, we'll talk about that with individual sketches as we go. Are there any questions on sheet B?
Yeah, Paul, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, so just to get a sense of scale, how far past the current cobblestone patio area are we pushing? I guess that would be in the westerly direction.
Here?
Yeah.
That's probably 30 to 40 feet from the existing paved walkway. Each of these spots is probably 9 or 10 feet wide. So yeah, I'm going to say 30 or 40 feet to the west. Again, this is a very sketch idea at the moment. It's not certainly not set in stone, but it would add space here, but take away some of the lawn area at this end, but leave this. So that a good question.
Okay, and that resulting interior space that we're adding is very roughly then what, 50 by 80?
Give or take. Well, that if that's probably from here to here, that's about 40. So you know, let's call the overall. This is probably about 100 by 30, and then another say 30 by 40, so 120 and 100
Yeah, I
by
haven't figured that out. I haven't figured out the
3,000.
square footage yet.
Yeah, it's probably at a guess 4,000 square feet or so.
Okay, that's fine.
Keep in mind, this is very sketchy. This wasn't done, you know, with a scale and setting, you know, this is just looking at it and literally sketching. We might be able to tell a little more as we look at the individual sketches when we can proportion it against other pieces.
Okay.
Question about the bus stop moving. Would the bus stop still be offset off of the road to leave a path for cars to get by when a bus is sort of idling? Is that the idea there, or would it be, because I can't quite tell if it's
Yeah, we'd have to figure that out.
okay.
We would have to figure it out. There's a drop off here where the curb cuts back to the sidewalk. But exactly where this gets located and keeps access here depends in part on what we maintain in the existing building at that location. Part of what we were trying to address was the idea that when you enter this parking lot, the first thing you see is sort of the maintenance garage door and the bus. You know, it's not intuitive where the entry is because it's all the way over here around the corner. So by pushing some things out here into a facade that is closer to the entry, we're trying to make things more obvious, and we're trying to clean this area up in the same way. But the final details we'll have to think about. Okay. You should have sketch C on your sheet now. And what
This
we're,
is existing.
this is the existing layout, if you will. So, nothing surprising here. You all understand how the building works from the entry. We have the L-shaped corridors here that make up the entry lobby, entry into the library proper. We have the meeting room wing with the children's story time, the large meeting room, the boardroom, and the studio. And then above this area that's dashed is this mezzanine. The mezzanine, I'm sure most of you are aware, but it was popular in the 60s and 70s to do this kind of structure. Colony has one. The Southern Adirondack Library System headquarters building has one. It's essentially a shelving system with integral metal posts, columns that hold and support the mezzanine floor above, but it's all an integral system, which means you can't simply take out a few of those columns for convenience. So you've seen that if you've been upstairs in the staff workroom that's up there, it's just a forest of columns. Even though the shelves were taken out, those posts all have to remain. Now, we have an interesting thing we're doing out in Auburn at the Seymour Library that has a similar, smaller scale version of this, where we've taken out, what we're doing now is taking out the shelves and creating little niches or reading spaces, but that's in a public area. This mezzanine, it would take a stretch for us to recommend public occupancy of the upper level because of the supervision issues, the intuitive usage issues, and so forth. So we'd be more likely to try and put staffing or public meeting space up there rather than patrons being up there in collection or niches or reading areas. But that's one of the things we're looking at, is what's the potential if we're really going to modify the layout of the main floor and or make big changes to the way the library functions. We might decide that this system is something that is constraining us and is worth the cost to remove and replace with a more traditional system that gives us flexibility, where we can change the direction of shelves, we can create more spaces, and we don't have the forest of posts. Sheet 1 is the first idea to sketch, and I'm going to have Lisa walk us through some of the ideas here. Remember, this is the layout that we were working with. Here's your existing entry. So as we come down here, you can see that this is an example of one of those infill pieces at area 5 that was on the original site sketch.
This first one of the constraints that we kept in place was the transformer. So we thought, let's leave that, see what happens if we leave it, and what kind of impact that makes on entry or other functions. And so that transformer has to have airflow all the way around it. So we couldn't build right up to it. So what we did is we have a covered walkway. So in theory, you could enter under a portico, and you're covered by, from weather, but you would still get the airflow around the transformer, and you could have windows into whatever this space is. So there you have at least an experience and a door that's closer to the parking lot than all the way down here. So we create a weather vestibule, and then the red dotted lines show you this is where the existing set of doors are. So we've added to the lobby space, but we've added something a little bit more dynamic. We've placed a large meeting room space right here so that there's windows here that you can see from the parking lot. There would be something vibrant going on. And there's windows and doors here so that you could gain access to the green space. A large amount of storage space and a kitchen that could serve this and also serve potentially a cafe or a lounge. And you could the meeting room spaces could also access this kitchen. We've done a little bit of renovation over here where we've sort of opened up this kitchen. Maybe it becomes more a craft storage area for the medium-sized meeting room. We left the small meeting room here, we left the studio, and we actually turned this into a sort of a medium-sized conference room instead of the children's program room, because what we did is we added a children's program space directly to the children's over here, slightly changing the entrance from Delaware Avenue. But we've also created a connection here so that it's right off this main lobby space. So this could be used after hours for some other function rather than just the children's story time room.
Now, I'm going to stop there for just 1 second. These are still very early sketches, and one of the things we'll be talking about as we go forward with ideas is how they get phased. Phasing, usually what we try to do is look at the end result and then work backwards. Where are we trying to get? So let's make sure we're doing everything that leads in that direction, and then what are the pieces we can break off of it, rather than working forward to it, because then sometimes you create something that has to be changed later. So if we stop right here where we were, this addition alone as a piece by itself does several things. It cuts the entry length from the parking lot by now we have a covered canopy out here, or portico. It adds a large meeting room, which you can see is larger than your existing large meeting room. In fact, this large meeting room makes your existing meeting room a medium-sized meeting room. We've kept these two. This could even stay children's for now. You don't have to do this work, but having done that, if this stays children's, you now have a small meeting room, a medium meeting room, and a large meeting room, as well as a lounge space out here, additional gallery space and so forth. And we've done that whole addition to address several things. The idea that the amount of public gathering space is overbooked and not easy to obtain, the amenities that go with it, like the kitchenette, and making the lobby area more welcoming instead of just a corridor, widening it into a lounge type thing, where people can, it's a cell phone friendly area perhaps. It could have laptop counters, it could have coffee service if you wanted. You could do it as a concession, or you could do it. When we visited Wisner Library, we saw even the Friends of the Library were selling Keurig cartridges as a fundraiser, for example. The other thing this addition would do, if it was a phase one, let's say, is give us this as a staging area, so that as we get into renovations in this area, they can move here while we renovate that space, and then move back. And then the next thing moves here and then moves back. So the addition of this space in a phase one, even if we didn't do anything else, gives us extra meeting rooms, closes the distance to the parking, and gives us staging for future phases. That was the idea behind it. Although, again, a formal phasing plan is something we'll look at when we get towards the end and work our way back. Lisa mentioned the second addition, which then brings the entrance a little closer to Delaware Ave, making it a more apparent entrance, and adds children program story time right to the children's library. Another thing we would want to look at potentially might be a family restroom off the children's area. That would involve some trenching to get the plumbing across to this area, but that would be an improvement for the children's room as well. So those are the first two pieces. And then Lisa, why don't you walk us through some of the others?
Before you do that, can I just ask two very quick clarifying questions?
Please.
So just to be clear, the suggestion to change the children's story time to the conference room, that the dimensions of that room have not changed, however, right? It's the same size, or is that also expanded?
Right. The only thing that we're suggesting is take out the restroom that's in there, just to gain some more space up at the entrance. And basically take over some of the storage for this room and then give some of the storage to that room.
Great, thank you. And the only other question, I noticed that in the collections area, both here and on a previous slide, We have nonfiction here over to the left and fiction to the right, which is the reverse of how things are now. Is this a suggestion by you about switching those, or is that just a misprint? Or
No, it really, when we get to that area, the fiction is usually more dynamic, and we would want to have lower shelves, so make it feel more like a bookstore or browsing. And just by opening up this whole area, taking the columns out, we can, you know, arrange that in any way possible. I think some of this area would probably still say fiction, but I think we want to try to move it in this direction.
At least the face toward the fiction area.
Right.
But generally, a nonfiction collection, in terms of its atmosphere, lends itself better to rows of stacks than the more retail aesthetic associated with the fiction collection. So we might flip those to give prominence to the fiction collection and keep the nonfiction a more traditional, staid. Excellent question, Brian. Though that is a good point.
So if I continue on with the children's, I think we would look in more depth with children's staff at how to rearrange this area. But what we did do is put some glass along the whole edge of this area for sound. That was a big comment in some of the staff interviews. And that way we've also then continued on to glassing off this space. Right now you have some study rooms, but we've made a large separate teen space, but also has glass around that as well. And the YA collection would be close. Part of it would be inside, part of it would be out here, just because there's some adults that like to browse that collection.
Graphic novels and so
Right.
forth. Yes.
And so media and new collections would be here. Relocate the things, because this area,
The Library of Things.
right, this area here right now is your CDs and some music and your things. And we wanted to gain some space for staff and pull the circulation desk from this point out into this space here. So we've taken over this space, and so we've started to put some mobile units here and into this big area. What we're doing over here is saying, yes, let's take out the system that you have in place, spend the money to get rid of all the columns in there and have a wide open usable space. We still left the existing elevator where it is. But what we did
In this sketch.
But what we did is we created 2 new stairways up and expanded that area so that when you jump over to this upper floor, you expand it by double. And what that becomes is sort of the staff workroom space, IT server, because I've moved them from this location, because this location is sort of prime real estate for the study rooms, for the maker space down in this area.
In fact, after discussion with this other day, we're actually thinking these 2 offices would more likely go upstairs, which would allow this to open right into this addition, which has then study rooms, lots of glass, a lounge area around it, and opens right to the original building. So the study rooms that are here essentially move out to the perimeter here and give us more space, so that when you come in, you're looking right down at a lot of glass and light. Literally a destination. The maker space gets more prominence then. And if some of these offices move upstairs in the space we gained, it's not just the mezzanine area now, but it climbs out into this addition, which was one of those infill additions. So the mezzanine is essentially twice as big as it used to be. So that's why we have 2 exit stairs as well as the elevator out here. But again, our anticipation would be that public is not likely to go upstairs unless invited by staff or for a specific interview or whatever the case may be. But you can see overall, a medium-sized addition and 3 small additions that could be sequenced, most likely this one first, and then these as time goes on. The big disruption is going to be here taking out that existing system, because obviously that's right in the middle of the library. That would be the biggest disruption overall. But this does gain several things and still allows, you can see here, a future addition, which we're not even showing on this sketch, but it has the potential to continue to add into the Borthwick property area. I'm mindful of the time. It's 8:30 already, so I'm going to move us on if that's okay, and we'll come back if there are other questions. Let's just look at this one as a slightly more sophisticated version of what we just talked about.
So what this one does is I said, okay, let's just assume we can take the transformer and move it wherever it really needs to be on the site.
Architects do that all the time. That's why engineers hate us.
But what it does is it provides you with an entrance pretty close to the parking lot, and it provides you with a much larger space over here. And we've shown it as a large meeting room space in this scheme. And what it does is it also allows us to add a little bit more room to the staff area here. And same thing, we grab that space that exists now, but we've also reconfigured where the entry would be. So you come in and then there's some glass doors and some glass, sort of a bump out here, so that you come in and you're really close to the middle of the space. We still left this entrance here, but now your line of sight starts to get a little bit more welcoming as soon as you walk into the building. We've got some glass and doors into this space. We can still have a gallery wall here, but then it opens up so that you can see through. And here we've really highlighted your library of things in this area, or it could be new and popular materials.
But there's even a bay window, if you will,
Yeah,
out into
right.
the lobby, so that we're, again, trying to explore that idea of getting the outside in and the inside out, so that you're looking through into other spaces. You see light, you see movement and things happening.
And what we did was we basically took out the staff break function and we moved it over here on the same level. And there can be a connection here to a small staff patio.
Mhm.
We did a restroom, we did a kitchenette, lockers and mailboxes would be there. That we did a kitchen that still could be accessed from both the big meeting room and all the other meeting room spaces. And we left some storage in that area. So the other thing we're doing is we're creating some glassy areas into the
What's now your
the
meeting room.
existing meeting room space. And what we've done in this one is said, why don't we make a physical connection with some glass and some doors, and maybe make this the children's program room, or story time room. It still could be the medium meeting room, but now there's a better connection here. But it still can be used after hours. You can close off the library. And in this one, we added a little bit bigger addition, but this could be a conference room. It could be in a large, we left the studio, I think.
No, it's storage
Okay.
up there, but some new version
Some
of
new
the
version of
studio
it.
that
Or-
takes account for what actually happens there.
Or a book sale space. So there's a little bit more flexibility. And we still maintain this as a conference room, but we renovated a restroom right off the children's program rooms, or whatever meeting room is going on. You can just use this restroom as well.
And it's in the back. So again, let's look at this in phases. This does involve the relocation of the transformer to some other spot on the site, but a small addition here actually adds to the back of house space. This adds the large meeting room. This one's even larger than the last one. And then we have small meeting room. This one primarily designated for children's, but it's a medium-sized meeting room, and a conference room and another conference room. So same sort of strategy that these things could happen if we're willing to concede that the connection for the children's library to the children's programs is sort of across a hall. It's a more direct connection than is there now, but it is still separated by public space. But you can imagine one of the priorities we're trying to emphasize is that you do story hour, not just for the literacy and the entertainment value, but to have them access the collection before and or after story hour. So we want families, instead of going out and leaving, to go into the collection. That's why we usually try to make them as proximate to each other as possible. Again, it's coming up on 20 up, but let's look at the other two additions and the mezzanine. This also anticipates the removal of the mezzanine. I just wanted to point out that from circulation, we can see this door, we can see down into this addition, and circ and help desk also have cross support.
The other thing this location does is you can see all the way down
Yeah.
to who's coming in at
From Delaware.
From Delaware as well.
Directly from the circulation desk. Yep.
In this scheme, we made, in the new addition over here, we made a new elevator so that we could clear out this area for those lines of sight. So that
Now I apologize.
Yeah.
From this door, you can see straight back through all the way through the building because that elevator has been moved. And then you can also see all the way down into the same sort of idea we had talked about here, with lots of windows and lots of borrowed light glass on the inside of these study rooms and so forth. So we're really opening up the space even more. And again, remember, these are just sketches. So say the idea of moving the elevator might be able, even if we liked more things here, maybe there's a way to move the elevator here the same way we did here. So we can sort of pick and choose, in some cases, the improvements we're trying to make and combine them into what works best. But why don't you walk through the other pieces?
So in this scheme, we did offices around the perimeter, and we made a larger space in the middle. One of the comments was, some kids use these for homework, but at times you want a larger space for SATs, so they can gather in this space all in one at one time, rather than going over to a medium meeting room. So we've sort of taken advantage of that. And then in some instances, we had a desire for smaller rooms and bigger rooms, but they could be divided or, opened up or closed depending on, how big a group you had. And then mostly same thing on the upper expanded level,
IT offices,
some shared workspace, some single offices. So that can all be, figured out. We were just showing a couple different layouts of what can happen up there. In these schemes are sort of going in order of sort of a minimal renovation to a much larger renovation.
We're upping the scale each time. Yep.
So each one of these has the potential for a future addition, where you get, in the first two schemes, you get a lot of what you were asking for. And then.
Well, what the public's asking for. Let's be clear about that.
Right, the public. So when we jumped to this third one, we thought, okay, let's shake things up a little bit. If we do a large meeting room on the Borthwick site, you're going to have an entrance to the library over there, and you're still going to have the same amount of staff. So you're going to need to sort of consolidate that line of sight so that you get this other set of entrances,
as well as
the existing. So what we decided to do is maybe take the kids and move them over into this addition. And what that does is it provides for a large enough space to do a program room, story hour room with glass right adjacent to it. You could still access it from the lobby if you wanted to have other groups use it at other times. But then what it does is there's a lot of glass here. There's a line of sight between the children's and the circ desk, and then the line of sight to reference, so that everybody can still see all the entrances of where everybody's coming into the building.
We didn't speak specifically the other day about this. So Jeff and Chris and Kathy, we don't anticipate in these schemes that it would be an increase of staff in any of them, from our perspective, but we need to talk in more detail about that. What we've tried to do is maintain the same number of workstations, but provide cross coverage, as we've talked about in strategies in other libraries. One of the things this one does by moving children's over here, which is a strategy that some libraries employ. Colony, for example, has sort of a separate children's wing. But it does mean that checkout has to happen at this desk. In other words, you would have to check out here because otherwise people are going potentially out before they go through to the main circ desk. So children's staff would have to do checkout and or self-check at the children's desk. The other thing this connection provided was a children's connection to that lawn area. So rather than a meeting room opening into that, it's now the children's area that opens into that. But it still gives us not just the children's library and their program space, but 1, 2, 3 meeting spaces again, and the very large meeting room up here. So this entry comes from Delaware, and you can see we have room to even do a little bit of a plaza out here. Although it would be similar to the plaza you have now in the back because it's long. But having said that, we do have the opportunity to put a sign and trees and benches and really emphasize the entrance to the library from Delaware Ave in a more prominent way than it is now. And it brings us up to this central lobby here or from the parking here. So we have a large meeting room and restrooms. This can be open after hours, and these pieces can be open after hours because the children's room can be locked off. Do you want to talk about? Yep.
Yep. So what we've done now is we sort of left nonfiction sort of where it is, but this whole area now can be the fiction collection, and rearranged, have some reading room spaces. We still want to maintain access to the children's garden. We've created a much larger teen space in this scenario, and then we've also created a series of study tutor rooms off of this area, off of this area, off of this area. So they're sort of spread out throughout the library.
Right. Which might be appropriate for adults looking for quiet reading areas or reserving a space. In other words, study tutor rooms are not just for school-age children. There are lots of reasons to reserve small rooms like that. And now we've given opportunities around the building sort of for that to happen. Can we go to the upstairs?
Yeah,
it's about quarter of.
So when you go to the upstairs, that area of the mezzanine can be another pretty large meeting room, or it could be divided into, say, a classroom or seminar. We do some room dividers. So when you come upstairs from the elevator or from this stair, you're in a much larger lobby. And then most of this here would be for staff, but there's 2 restrooms for public up here, 1 restroom and staff break room up here. We're moving IT, maybe building storage, but it's mostly going to be staff above the meeting room space.
Now, one thing, a decision that would have to be made fairly early on is whether this classroom seminar space is something we want to do. Obviously, we added meeting space here. This would be another opportunity. However, it would also save money to simply take that structure out. Remember, this is the mezzanine structure here, and leave that open as a 2-story space from below, not infill this. That would save some money. And it would also mean that the public would have no reason to be upstairs at all. Now it is just staff up here. Whereas if these are public meeting spaces, if we decide we really need them, we do have to make sure we maintain a threshold here with that staff are beyond that door and the public is kept out into this area. So that might be one of those budgetary things we think about. And the reason I say the decision would have to be made sort of early in that scheme is this is not a space you're going to want to retrofit into that hole later. So once the mezzanine comes out to do this, you're going to want to decide then, is this going to happen above it or is it not? You know, we can keep pricing it or looking at options up until that point, but that's one area that could go either way. So I said I wanted to leave about 15 minutes. It's 8:46 by my clock. Does anybody have any comments? We're not looking for anybody to make a decision. Let's do 3. I mean, that's not what we're saying. But are there ideas or concepts? Are there questions? Recognizing that we still want to look at the Borthwick House. And the other thing that we're going to do, just so that we have covered all the bases, is look at not doing any additions. What would we do to just rearrange things in the existing building? But as you can imagine, that involves some real sacrifices, because you can't add something without taking something else away if we're going to work with a net zero gain. So there are things we could do to improve the library, certainly within the footprint, and that'll be one of the things we provide in the master plan. But it won't be doing some of the things we've been talking about, like adding meeting room space primarily, unless we're sacrificing something else. So I'll bring us all the way back to the first sheet, and if anybody has any thoughts or comments, please share them. But we're going to continue to develop these based on what you're thinking. I guess I'd also say, if you have comments over the next week, maybe get them to Jeff and Brian, and they can forward them to us. Yeah, it's a lot to absorb in you've had it for a couple of days, but you don't have to have everything right now. If something occurs to you, we're happy to keep looking at things.
One thing that does occur to me is that the third and largest model does separate the children's area from the children's reading plaza
Right,
by quite a distance.
correct.
So I would wonder if we would want to move the plaza or repurpose that space and or.
Yeah, no, you're talking about this
Right.
area here. You're right, which has traditionally been that. Now, and that's a question we come across sometimes. Was that a memorial thing or named for somebody? And how open are they to potentially recapturing it in a different location?
Yes, it was, and maybe they would be, but we don't know. We haven't broached that, obviously.
Right, and don't until we decide it's something we really want to do. That's not a can of worms you want to open if you don't. But you know, we have done that in other places where a family has contributed to something, and we say we're going to create either an equal or better thing over here with your permission. In other cases, people are set on that. That's where it is, and in that case, you're right, Brian. It's remote from where the children's area actually is. It is accessible, I presume, from Delaware Ave, though, right? Isn't Delaware along?
It is.
How does it go site-wise?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's out in here. So, I mean, it would still be very visible. Whereas if we put it back here by the children's room, it might be more usable for the children's library that we created, but it wouldn't be as visible from Delaware Ave. So there are merits to keeping something here and still doing something out here, or both. But you're right, that's a consideration.
Also, I was wondering, I don't see a lot of potential here for natural light with all the meeting rooms being closed off on the outside bounds of your sketches. Am I missing it?
Just about every edition
Yeah.
there would be windows sort of all along here, and then glass on these inner walls as well. So there would be a lot of light. Some have more than others. So for example, here's a glass wall directly into this lounge area, whereas in this version, it's borrowed light from the outer windows to the inner windows. There is glass at the ends there. The other thing is that with the additions, we can also talk about, you know, how you have the feature above the center now with the clear story, the high glass space, that's an option out here, potentially out here, or even out here. But certainly at this end, putting glass above the lobby, above this space is an opportunity up high as well. But you're right, we've been talking about trying to maximize glass, but even within existing spaces, potentially adding glass around some of the perimeter spaces that don't have it now.
All right. The only other thing I was wondering was, I thought I had heard the staff mention a need for extra storage.
Mhm.
And I didn't see any designated extra storage. It looks like you have garage and storage. Had you added anything, any extra storage?
In each one of the spaces, we've increased the footprint of of most of the staff areas, and we haven't specifically laid anything out yet, but there's enough room, I think, in each of the schemes where I actually have designated. In this one, there's a whole building storage up here, but if this area here wanted to be storage and all the workstations are out here, we can definitely do that. There's enough space, but we just haven't designated it specifically for that.
As a general rule, we try to build in storage in the areas where they're actually needed rather than centralized storage
Right.
rooms. Centralized storage is good for things like building maintenance and overall infrastructure, but for staff work areas and particularly program areas, our preference is usually to, you took the tour with us, Michelle, I think, right? And saw in those activity rooms and those meeting rooms, we had built-in pantry cabinetry, for example, around the perimeters. It's so that the storage is right there at hand. So we're not showing the furniture layout in those areas, but they would very likely include lots of individual storage like that. But as Lisa was just saying, we could also then designate some larger central storage areas in addition to the ones we show. But it's an excellent point. Storage is, except for Rosemary Cooper at Wisner, storage is a priority for everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
That?
Yes.
Paul, for the large meeting rooms, I guess just in your experience, have you found an effective way to subdivide those rooms so that you can have 2 medium rooms when you need 2 and then convert it back to 1 when you need 1? I mean, I've seen some systems that don't work. Have you seen systems that do work?
The short answer is no. And I'll tell you, yeah, the technology has gotten better in terms of those those partitions that come across, the moving wall partitions. But I'm sure you've been at seminars or banquets or weddings in a conference center, and the room next door starts applauding or cheer. It's fine if it's 2 similar functions, but if you have goat yoga in one and then you have children's sing along in the other, there is no way that those partitions acoustically separate each other, even the higher quality expensive ones. The other, and I'm not saying it's impossible, we do them sometimes when it's absolutely a necessity. But the other thing to think about is sometimes, depending on how you do reservations, reserving half of that room is the same as reserving the whole room. Because if you give away half of it, now it can only another group the same size can take the other half. You've taken away a large meeting room for half the function. So we try to avoid them in general. It also has some logistical issues because you need to be able to exit both of them and have access to restrooms from both of them when it's divided, even when the rest of the building's closed. So we have done it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would say we tend to try to avoid it because we don't think they're very successful. We've been in a lot of libraries where they say, yeah, we've got these foldable partitions, we haven't used it in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's been our experience. I can be convinced otherwise if somebody said, no, here's why we absolutely need to do it, but it wouldn't be my first approach, I would say.
Yeah, understood.
I just had a couple questions about shelving and office space. And I wondered if we had, I'm not sure that we have an idea. Maybe probably Jeff does and the rest of the team. How many shelving units we have currently, how many we would like to move towards, and then also in the same vein, office space. Some of these seem to have a lot more office space laid out than others, and I wondered, because I'll be honest, I don't know how much more need. I mean, are we short on office space? Do we need more, less? I don't know. So just a couple of questions.
The short answer is we're short on office space.
Okay.
Overall, yeah. Some are too big but more are too small. So from a net, I would agree with that 100% that you're short on office space now. Collection, we've started an inventory of all the shelving. We look at shelving by lineal footage rather than square footage because we're just trying to determine the capacity. And as you can imagine, a James Michener novel is that thick and Dr. Seuss is this thick. So to us, the collection size in terms of number of units doesn't matter. It's the lineal footage of shelving that matters for each collection. So these are just sketches, as we were saying, but as we develop these more, we will have a comparison for each section. So it would say adult fiction, adult nonfiction. These are the existing lineal footages. These are the lineal footages provided in this scheme. And we would do the same for children's areas, for the library of things, for media, music, and so forth.
All would that before and after comparison also include office space and meeting space?
Yes. Again, when we've been working from home, which is why these are literally sketches. But very often what we have in the corner of the drawing is a little spreadsheet column that lists each space, says what it is existing, or maybe it doesn't exist at all right now, and then what it is future, and then has a net, whether it was an increase, decrease, or wash. So again, that's all part of how we'll explain it going forward. We just wanted to take advantage of our time at home to be working on something that can actually move this forward. So we've done that part, but we're going to have to be in the office to use a little more sophisticated stuff to calculate those. But it's definitely part of these as we go forward. Yes.
And I would think we would want to do the same thing with the study tutor space, because that's obviously something we've heard a lot about, as well as some of the computer space. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to really compare or whether it's all more, less,
Okay.
just reoriented. It's hard for me to tell just in looking at these.
It's certainly something, when it comes to the point of garnering public support, whether for a fundraising campaign or a referendum or whatever it may be, those are absolutely things that we would show. I didn't think of it for this morning's meeting and we had to keep it short anyway, but next time, if you'd like, or in the interim, I can send it to you. We did for Guilderland, for example, literally number of meeting rooms in the existing and number that we have now, number of seats in meeting rooms, number of hardwired computers, and the collection sizes for each one as well. So you're absolutely right. It's just something we haven't gotten to at this level of sketch detail.
If I can jump in with one more question, also about the final, the one that is up now, the final, the third model.
Okay.
I just am looking at, I really like how all three designs take line of sight so seriously. I really commend you for that. And I think it's really just wonderful. The security of patrons, particularly younger patrons, is very important to us for many reasons. The only thing I noticed on the third model is that in the children's library, the children's desk seems to have limited sight lines into the children's area itself, including towards an exit. And so I just wondered, maybe that's just the way it's sketched, and maybe but I wonder if you could comment on that.
You're absolutely right. I was gonna bring it right around the corner like the circulation desk. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna leave it like this for now. So
it's cut.
Yeah, it's.
And I would say in children's libraries in general, the exit doors are alarmed, and we use something called a delayed action egress. So you push the bar, but it takes 15 seconds for the door to open. So the alarm goes off and the door doesn't immediately open. And that's partly for ambitious children, but it's actually primarily for things like non-custodial parents or other people sort of slipping out a door with children. Yeah, it's a security issue all the time. Sightline is the first line of security from our perspective. So you're absolutely right. We want to play with where that desk is. But beyond that, there are physical things that we would put on exit doors, particularly from children's areas. Yep.
You know, one thing we need to keep in mind, COVID-19 may change the way we interact with each other, ways we don't know yet how it is. So this looks very crowded to me at this point. This is like pre-COVID-19 kind of framework. We don't know going forward what's going to happen.
No, we don't know. That's true. I've actually been participating in several statewide and more local conversations about what this means for the future of library services. Tim Burke and I had a long conversation just the other day, as a matter of fact. And if I'm not downplaying your concern, I brought up the same exact issue, that this could change in some ways the whole philosophy of what we accept as gathering space as community. On the other hand, you do see people desperate to get back into, a public situation. People, the evidence when I drive by somebody's driveway and they're standing 6 feet apart in a driveway in lawn chairs, just so that they have some human contact. So I still think some of the things we talk about are valid, creating smaller reading niches rather than large open spaces where you're right next to somebody at a table that you don't know. We prefer the 2 tops and 4 top tables to the 6 and 8 top tables. I would say there's still going to be need for public meetings. Anybody who's dealt with the frustration of conferences like this, I don't think those things are going away completely, but we absolutely, Robert, need to keep an open mind about it. This obviously is unprecedented, and it's changing the way a lot of people think about a lot of things. I'll be surprised if we become a completely introverted stay-at-home community as a whole, though. So you're right. Some of the things we'll have to wait and see what happens. The key to this is keeping it as flexible as possible so we can shift it if it turns out that we're not using things the way we used to. So things like that mezzanine area with all those posts, that's 1960s thinking. We're getting rid of that to create an open space that can be rearranged for collection or small gathering areas or larger gathering areas, whatever it may be. So keeping flexibility, I think, is the key to trying to answer the questions we don't know the answers to yet. I'm glad you brought it up. It's on everybody's mind. You're absolutely right.
It could be as simple as the staff needs more space.
More space to separate staff from each other, yes. More back of house space so staff can do work where they're not exposed to the public. That's actually something we've been dealing with at Saratoga Springs Public Library because of, I think I talked to you before about incident where somebody came in off the street. It used to be that staff wanted as much freedom to move from behind the circ desk out onto the floor as possible, either to help patrons or to tackle somebody who's running out the door with something they didn't check out. But now we're actually trying to put a little more of a barrier, at least a gate, to slow people down because somebody walked in off the street and walked behind the desk and started assaulting a staff member. So you're right, we're constantly changing the way we have to think about the way service is provided. But as long as we keep the building as open and free as possible, we have more freedom to do those things easily.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little after 9. We're happy to entertain any other questions or thoughts. If you want to gather your thoughts after today for a few days and then drop us a note, that might be the most efficient way so nobody feels rushed. You don't have to write long narratives, just write some bullet points down and we can try and accommodate them as we develop these a little further.
That sounds good. Thank you, Paul.
We'd like to keep moving forward on it. It's something, it actually works. The timing for you guys was golden in terms of us being able to work on this remotely rather than having to be in the office all the time for it. So if with your permission, we'd like to keep pushing it and developing it. And schedules for everything are out the window at the moment. Construction is stopped on most projects. It's hard to say what's happening. Public meetings are hard to have, but in your case, I think we can keep things going. So we're happy to do that.
In the interest of time, should we defer our scheduling of the May meeting until to do it over email, or do we want to firm that up right now?
Why don't we wait a week if that's okay with you? Send us your comments by next week, and then we could. It's been okay to schedule things by email, no? Or has that been a problem?
It's fine for me.
If you all don't mind doing that, let's do that.
Sure.
As it happens, by being home more often, it means less travel, which actually means more flexibility in the calendar than I usually have. So Lisa's working hard on this, and it'll give us time to do more. Yeah, let's figure it out next week if that's okay.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think that's the end of the meeting. Thanks so much, Paul and Lisa, for these great designs and giving us so much to think about.
Sketches. Excellent. Thank you all. You're a great committee to work with, and I appreciate all the input too. It's great. Every person sort of adds something to these conversations, and they're all things for us to keep in mind. So very much appreciated that everybody's attending these regularly. It's fantastic.
Thank you, both of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, folks. Everybody stay safe.
Bye, everyone. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.